when the feminism movement first began, it began as an initial campaign to basically just get the vote, to basically have equal rights alongside their male counterparts. And this eventually morphed and changed throughout the 20th to 21st century. But one of its primary themes has always been to end the violence and abuse against women, especially at the hands of men. And this is the primary theme and thesis behind Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride film. The Bride is obviously about the bride of Frankenstein. And this film has a lot of context that comes if you have read the Mary Shelley's novel of the Frankenstein monster. Now, the Frankenstein novel was written in a time where women really weren't able to become writers, and if they did write books, they had to write under pseudonyms. So, for example, Lewis Carroll was one of those writers where she had to go under a pseudonym in order to write Alice in Wonderland, I think. And what is interesting about Mary Shelley's story is Mary Shelley had actually lost her baby. And the whole idea behind the Frankenstein, according to some of her, of the people who follow her work, is that the Frankenstein monster could be a reflection of losing her child, and this idea about bringing the child back from the dead. And in the absence of a woman and her womb, man cannot create life. And in many ways, the Frankenstein novel presents Frankenstein's monster as a perversion of creation. And it perverts this idea that you cannot create life without a woman. And we see in the film of The Bride some of the layers and the context behind of the novel exist within the context of the film that adds a little bit of the backstory behind Frankenstein and the way Frankenstein is presented in Maggie Gyllenhaal's version of Frankenstein, who is played really, really well by Christian Bale. Christian Bale continues to work with his method acting and really sells audiences on the idea of this very lonely and very damaged Frankenstein. And Frankenstein is also a character who has something that is very, very topical amongst men right now, and that is this idea of male loneliness. And male loneliness is very much a male-centric issue that the male gender is having right now, where we are failing to create families, we're failing to connect with women, particularly amongst Gen Z individuals who are not actively getting who aren't marrying, they're not connecting with women, they're not having children. There's this whole loneliness epidemic amongst men, and it's very enticing, especially for a lonely man, to want a woman, and that's really what we find in this film, where Christian Bale's Frankenstein is basically looking to resurrect a girl in the way that he was resurrected, so he can have a relationship. Now, this is initially seen in a very, very sexual context. I wanted to talk about this first, because it adds, I think, sort of that male loneliness topic before we launch into the bride's perspective. But when men talk about wanting sex, it's not entirely what men mean. Now, in some cases, yeah, sure, men just want to screw around. But when men talk about wanting sex, they're not actually saying they want sex. What they're saying is, we want to connect with you, and the way that we connect with you is through sexual intimacy. Touching, feeling and being connected with a woman in that sexual way is how we communicate our desires, how we communicate our needs to you, how we really communicate that you're ours and we are yours. It's that whole dynamic that comes into play during sex. So when Frankenstein is saying that he wants sex and he wants pleasure, he's really saying that he just wants companionship and he wants someone to be connected to. And because he is dead, and because he basically looks like a monster, he can't really have the same level of connection as he would with another woman. And it's this that we see play out during the film, where he finds that connection in a very Bonnie and Clyde dynamic with the bride. And this is what I found to be really, really interesting about the character of Frankenstein. Now, my issues with the Frankenstein character is that we didn't get a lot of the context behind his character. We can definitely infer that a lot of the events of Mary Shelley's novel is the backstory of this version of Frankenstein. But we don't get a lot of the character of this version of Frankenstein. And unfortunately, I can't help but compare it to other versions and iterations of the character. Especially with the likes of Creature Commandos having most recently used elements and adaptations of Mary Shelley novel when it comes to the characters that they used. Now we can finally discuss The Bride. and bring in all of those feminist ideas that I raised at the beginning of this video. Mary Shelley, Ida or Penelope, we're just going to call her the bride, is basically how this film presents its so the bride in the film uses the ideas of feminists. So the bride is basically a vessel for Mary Shelley's spirit, who inhabits the vessel of Ida and uses her body to basically present these strong female ideas, especially when it comes to the ideas of violence against women. And the way that the violence is presented and the abuse that is presented throughout the film, and the way that we come to see that as we see the eyes of the bride. And we see many instances throughout the film of men doing very horrible stuff to women. And we see how inappropriate it is. We see how objectifying it is. And we see that when Ida was a prostitute, she was actively striving to fight against this. And she was actively striving to stop a mobster from actually killing and cutting the tongues out of women. And these are very, very important issues because it really presents this idea of females being abused by men. And this isn't something that happened in the 1900s. This is stuff that is happening today. And we see it in the news almost every day. And we've become, as a society, almost numb to it. And it's so important that when we discuss these ideas, we are discussing the fact that these things are happening to women of all ages, including very, very young girls. And Mary Shelley's spirit acts as a voice that turns the bride into a bit of a spirit of vengeance, I will admit. And it can be argued that it's a little bit preachy. But the ultimate goal is basically the bride finding this identity and a strength when it comes to being the bride of Frankenstein. And finding empowerment through that. Now, is this empowerment by a man who basically forced creation onto her? It can also be argued that this film is basically trying to save the girl. I would argue that yes, a lot of that is true, but the way in which the bride is seeking authorship through taking control of her own life is very, very important, and that is the whole point of the film. So the bride... So that's all I really have to say without getting too long into the film. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. I obviously have a lot more to say about this film. So if you do want to discuss the film with me, or if you do want me to talk about the film further, leave a comment down below. Thank you to all of the new subscribers and old subscribers who have stayed on this channel. The channel is doing exceptionally well. I'm really happy that a lot of you guys are enjoying the shorts that I've been posting. This video is something a bit new. So if you enjoy it, please leave a comment, please like, and feel free to subscribe. And yeah, I'll catch you all later. Bye, guys.